The assumptions remain beyond challenge, even perception. In 2005, the press reported that the Bush administration was facing a serious dilemma. Venezuela was seeking extradition of one of the most notorious Latin American terrorists, Luis Posada Carriles, to face charges for the bombing of a Cubana airliner, killing 73 people. The charges were credible, but there was a real difficulty. After Posada escaped from a Venezuelan prison, he was hired by U.S. covert operatives to direct the resupply operation for the Nicaraguan Contras from El Salvador, that is, to play a prominent role in Washington's terrorist war against Nicaragua. Hence the dilemma. Extraditing him for trial could send a worrisome signal to covert foreign agents that they cannot count on unconditional protection from the U.S. government, and it could expose the CIA to embarrassing public disclosures from a former operative. A virtual entry requirement for the Society of Respectable Intellectuals is the failure to perceive that there might be some slight problem here. At the same time that Venezuela was pressing its appeal, overwhelming majorities in the Senate and House passed a bill barring U.S. aid to countries that refuse requests for extradition. U.S. requests, that is. Washington's regular refusal to honor requests from other countries seeking extradition of leading terrorists passed without comment, though some concern was voiced over the possibility that the bill theoretically might bar aid to Israel because of its refusal to extradite a man charged with a brutal 1997 murder in Maryland, who had fled to Israel and claimed citizenship through his father. At least temporarily, the Posada dilemma was thankfully resolved by the courts, which rejected Venezuela's appeal, in violation of a U.S.-Venezuelan extradition treaty. A day later, the head of the FBI, Robert Mueller, urged Europe to speed U.S. demands for extradition. "We are always looking to see how we can make the extradition process go faster," he said. "We think we owe it to the victims of terrorism to see to it that justice is done efficiently and effectively." At the Ibero-American Summit shortly after, the leaders of Spain and the Latin American countries backed Venezuela's efforts to have Posada extradited from the United States to face trial for the Cubana airliner bombing, but then backed down after the U.S. Embassy protested the action. Washington not only rejects or merely ignores extradition requests for terrorists, it also uses the tool of presidential pardons for acceptable crimes. Bush 1 pardoned Orlando Bosch, a notorious international terrorist and associate of Posada, despite objections by the Justice Department, which urged that he be deported as a threat to national security. Bosch resides safely in the United States, perhaps to be joined by Posada, in communities that continue to serve as the base for international terrorism. No one would be so vulgar as to suggest that the United States should be subject to bombing and invasion in accord with the Bush II doctrine that those who harbor terrorists are as guilty as the terrorists themselves, announced when the government in Afghanistan asked for evidence before handing over people the United States accused of terrorism, without credible grounds, as Robert Mueller later acknowledged. The Bush doctrine has already become a de facto rule of international relations, writes Harvard International Relations specialist Graham Allison. It revokes the sovereignty of states that provide sanctuary to terrorists. Some states, that is, thanks to the exemption provided by the single standard. The single standard also extends to weapons and other means of destruction. U.S. military expenditures approximate those of the rest of the world combined, while arms sales by 38 North American companies, one of which is based in Canada, account for more than 60% of the world total. Furthermore, for the world-dominant power, the means of destruction have few limits. Articulating what those who wish to see already knew, the prominent Israeli military analyst Reuven Pedatzur writes that in the era of a single ruthless superpower, whose leadership intends to shape the world according to its own forceful worldview, nuclear weapons have become an attractive instrument for waging wars, even against enemies that do not possess nuclear arms. When asked, why should the United States spend massively on arms and China refrain, Max Boot, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, provided a simple answer. We guarantee the security of the world, protect our allies, keep critical sea lanes open, and lead the war on terror, while China threatens others and could ignite an arms race, actions inconceivable for the United States. Surely no one but a crazed conspiracy theorist might mention that the United States controls sea lanes in pursuit of U.S. foreign policy objectives, hardly for the benefit of all, or that much of the world regards Washington, particularly since the beginning of the Bush II presidency, as the leading threat to world security. Recent global polls reveal that France is most widely seen as having a positive influence in the world, alongside Europe generally and China, while the countries most widely viewed as having a negative influence are the U.S. and Russia. But again, there is a simple explanation. The polls just show that the world is wrong. It's easy to understand why. As Boot has explained elsewhere, Europe has often been driven by avarice, and the cynical Europeans cannot comprehend the strain of idealism that animates U.S. foreign policy. After 200 years, Europe still hasn't figured out what makes America tick. Others share these mental failings, notably those close by, who have considerable experience and therefore are particularly misguided. Of the countries polled, Mexico is among those most negative about the U.S. role in the world. The course and outcome of a May 2005 review of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, to which we will return, illustrates the gravity of our responsibility for the persistence and enhancement of severe threats to our endangered species. A leading concern of participants in the NPT conference was Washington's intent to remove the nuclear brakes, thereby taking a big and dangerous step that will lead to the transformation of the nuclear bomb into a legitimate weapon for waging war. The potential consequences could not be more stark. Risking ultimate doom. The risk of nuclear destruction, highlighted by Russell and Einstein, is not abstract. We have already come close to the brink of nuclear war. The best-known case is the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, when our escape from nuclear oblivion was nothing short of miraculous, two prominent researchers conclude. At a retrospective conference in Havana in 2002, historian and Kennedy advisor Arthur Schlesinger described the crisis as the most dangerous moment in human history. Participants at the conference learned that the dangers were even more severe than they had believed. They discovered that the world was one word away from the first use of a nuclear weapon since Nagasaki, as reported by Thomas Blanton of the National Security Archive, which helped organize the conference. He was referring to the intervention of a Russian submarine commander, Vasily Arkhipov, who countermanded an order to fire nuclear-armed torpedoes when his vessels were under attack by U.S. destroyers, with consequences that could have been dreadful. Among the high-level planners who attended the Havana retrospective was Kennedy's Defense Secretary, Robert McNamara, who recalled in 2005 that the world had come within a hair's breadth of nuclear disaster during the missile crisis. He accompanied this reminder with a renewed warning of apocalypse soon, describing current U.S. nuclear weapons policy as immoral, illegal, militarily unnecessary, and dreadfully dangerous. This policy creates unacceptable risks to other nations and to our own, both the risk of accidental or inadvertent nuclear launch, which is unacceptably high, and of nuclear attack by terrorists. McNamara endorsed the judgment of Clinton's Defense Secretary William Perry that there is a greater than 50% probability of a nuclear strike on U.S. targets within a decade. Graham Allison reports that the consensus in the national security community is that a dirty bomb attack is inevitable, while an attack with a nuclear weapon is highly likely if fissionable materials, the essential ingredient, are not retrieved and